The garage door was wide open, and the space where my husband's car should have been was just empty. For a moment, my heart forgot how to beat. 20 years of his love, his patience, his work gone like a puff of breath in winter. I gripped the doorframe, staring at the oil stain on the floor as if the car might suddenly reappear. But it wouldn't. And deep down, I knew who had taken it. If you want to hear the rest of this story, stay with me and subscribe for more. I stood there in my old slippers, the spring air brushing against my face, smelling faintly of cut grass, and something else: emptiness. That space in the garage had never been bare. Not once. For over 2 decades, my late husband's car had rested right there, like a loyal companion. I used to joke that he loved that Shelby more than he loved me. And maybe, in his quiet way, he did. It wasn't just a car, it was a promise. A piece of him that stayed when everything else changed. I walked forward slowly, the concrete cold beneath my feet. My hand brushed against the edge of the workbench, the one he'd built himself when he retired. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. His tools hung on the pegboard, each one outlined in black marker so he'd always know where to return them. His red toolbox was shut tight, corners a little worn from years of use. And on the bench lay his work journal opened to the last page he wrote on before he died. I picked it up carefully, as if it might break, and traced my finger over his handwriting. It was shaky toward the end, letters a little looser than usual. Almost done. Can't wait to teach Carol to drive her properly. Next summer, we hit the road together. That's what he wrote. That's what he believed. But Dennis never made it to that summer. I closed the journal gently and held it against my chest. The garage still smelled like him: motor oil, old leather, and the orange soap he always used to scrub his hands clean. I could almost hear him humming old rock songs, his voice mixing with the rumble of that engine. But today, there was nothing, just silence. Then I saw the black BMW pulling into the driveway. My son, Brian. He stepped out slowly, hands buried in his pockets, shoulders tight. I knew that look. He'd worn it since he was a boy, every time he did something wrong and didn't know how to face me. Beside him, Vanessa climbed out of the passenger side. She looked flawless, as always. Sunglasses, dark hair smooth, her clothes polished and expensive. She didn't belong in a garage like this. She belonged in fancy brunches and hotel lobbies, and she liked it that way. "Mom," Brian called out, stopping at the edge of the driveway. "Where's the car, Brian?" My voice came out steady, but I felt the ground tilting beneath me. He shifted his weight, avoiding my eyes. "That's what I need to talk to you about." I stepped closer, heart pounding. "Where is it?" His jaw clenched. I sold it. For a heartbeat, I didn't understand the words. They floated through the air like they were in another language. I sold it. My hands went cold. "You what?" I whispered. "I sold it yesterday," he said, looking past me toward the empty garage. "I needed the money. Vanessa's been planning this Paris trip for months. It's important for her business connections. I couldn't let her down." The world narrowed. That car wasn't just some metal and leather. It was Dennis's legacy, his pride, his love, and my son, our only child, had sold it like it was just another thing. I crossed my arms to stop my hands from shaking. "That was your father's car." Brian's voice hardened. "Dad's gone, Mom. You don't even drive it. It was just sitting there." I repeated softly, like the word itself had weight. "I got a good price for it. 15,000. I almost laughed. 15,000. For a car Dennis spent 20 years building piece by piece. A car he promised would stay in this family long after we were both gone. I didn't yell. 43 years as a nurse in the ICU taught me how to keep my voice calm when everything inside was shattering. "When did you take it?" "Yesterday afternoon. You were at the store." Of course, he still had the key. He'd lived here once, before Vanessa, before everything changed. And Dennis always left the garage unlocked. For convenience, I never thought that trust would turn into this. You should have asked me, I said. Would you have said yes? He shot back. No, I answered simply. That's when Vanessa walked up beside him, slipping her hand onto his arm like she was claiming him. Her red nails glimmered in the morning sunday. Carol, she said smoothly, we're not discussing this. It's done. The car is sold. We leave for Paris tomorrow. I turned my eyes on her. For 2 years, she'd been in my life, married to Brian. And yet, I didn't know her, not really. She'd always been polite, polished, and distant. But there was something colder behind her smile now. This is between me and my son, I said. I'm his wife, she countered. What's between you and him is between all of us. Brian shifted uncomfortably, but didn't say a word. Brian needed that money, Vanessa continued in that honey, sweet voice of hers. The car was just sitting here. It made sense to sell it. It was his father's, I repeated. His father is dead, she said, flat and unbothered. And Brian is trying to build a life. We both are. Surely you understand that. Oh, I looked at my son. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. Not once. Vanessa smiled then. We'll send you photos from Paris. You'd love it there. The architecture, the museums, very romantic. The cruelty of that line wasn't loud. It was quiet, almost elegant, the kind that twisted the knife slowly. Brian cleared his throat. We should go. We still need to pack. Yes, Vanessa said, tugging lightly on his arm. We have an early flight. They walked back to the BMW. Brian looked back once, just once, and saw me standing in the garage with my arms folded across my chest. Then he got in the car. Vanessa rolled her window down as they backed out. Take care of yourself, Carol. We'll see you when we get back. The car turned the corner, and I was alone again. I walked back into the garage, stood in the center of that empty space, and stared at the oil stain Dennis had left behind. The sunlight came through the open door, catching the dust floating in the air. I picked up his journal again. I read his last words about our road trip, about teaching me to drive. I pressed the journal against my chest like it could fill the hole they'd carved out of me. 8 months of being a widow. I thought I'd already cried every tear there was. I was wrong. The phone rang the next morning at exactly 7. I'd been awake since 4, sitting at the kitchen table with Dennis's journal in front of me, tracing the ink with my fingers. The number was unknown. Hello? I answered, voice rough. Mrs. Bennett? A man's voice. Warm, but frayed around the edges. My name's Tom Graves. Graves Classic Auto. I have your husband's car. I sat up straight. What? The Shelby. Your son brought it in Wednesday. I need you to come down here. There's something Dennis wanted you to know. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. I don't understand. I was Dennis's friend, a good friend. I should have spoken to you at the funeral, but I didn't have the courage. Please, Mrs. Bennett, can you come? I remembered him then. A man in the back of the room at Dennis's funeral. Gray hair, dark suit. He'd slipped out before I could greet anyone. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said. I hung up the phone and went to my room. Jeans, sweater, keys, purse. I drove across town with both hands gripping the steering wheel like it might disappear if I let go. The hospital I'd worked at for 40 years was already buzzing with life when I passed it. Morning traffic light. My heart anything but. Graves Classic Auto sat at the end of a long industrial street. A clean building with a yard full of gleaming vintage cars behind a fence. A man waited outside the entrance, gray hair, jeans, button-down shirt. He straightened when he saw me. Mrs. Bennett, he said, stepping forward. I'm Tom Graves. I shook his hand. It was warm, but trembling. Your husband saved my life 25 years ago, he said quietly. No bank would give me a loan to start this place. Dennis co-signed for me. He believed in me when no one else did. I paid him back, every cent, but I never forgot. I swallowed hard. Dennis never told me any of this. Tom blinked back emotion. When your son walked in here with that Shelby, I recognized it instantly. Dennis talked about that car all the time. He was so proud of it. Your son had no idea what he was holding in his hands. What do you mean? I asked. Tom met my eyes. He sold it to me for $15,000, but that car, Dennis's car, is worth around $180,000. The world tilted again. $180,000. Tom sighed. I bought it to keep it out of someone else's hands. But Dennis made me promise something years ago. If anything ever happened to him, and that car came through my doors, I was to call you immediately and show you what he left behind. I stared at him, numb. What did he leave? Tom nodded toward the garage. Come with me. Tom led me through the glass doors and into the heart of the dealership. The smell of polished chrome and oil hit me immediately, mingled with that faint metallic scent that always reminded me of Dennis. The space was bright, spotless, lined with cars that gleamed like they'd been cared for more tenderly than some people care for their children. Every single one of them seemed to whisper of a past life engines that once roared down open roads, dreams that had lived behind their steering wheels. He walked ahead slowly, like he understood this wasn't just a place of business for me. This was holy ground. We reached the back of the garage, where 3 cars sat beneath soft gray covers. Tom stopped at the last one and looked at me before pulling the cover back. Burgundy paint, chrome shining under the fluorescent light. It was Dennis's Shelby. The breath I'd been holding for months escaped me in one long, shaky exhale. My fingers tingled. My knees almost buckled. That car had been part of my marriage for more than 20 years. It had been there in the background of birthdays, anniversaries, long summer nights when Dennis would lose track of time under its hood. It was a piece of him. Seeing it again felt like he was standing right there beside me. I stepped closer. My hand brushed the smooth curve of the hood. The metal was cool beneath my skin, but it burned hot somewhere deep in my chest. Tom leaned against the doorframe, his voice low. 2 years ago, Dennis asked me to help him install something, a hidden compartment. I blinked at him. A what? A compartment. Behind the radio. Said if anything ever happened to him, I needed to make sure you found it. Tom's jaw tightened. He made me promise. I glanced toward the dashboard, feeling the weight of something bigger than me filling the air. Why didn't he tell me? Tom gave a sad smile. He said you'd want to face everything together. But he also said there were things he needed to protect you from. That sounded like Dennis. He'd always carried burdens quietly, convinced that shielding me was an act of love. Tom stepped forward, showing me where to press and pull. The radio face popped loose with a faint click, revealing a dark, hidden space behind it. For a second, I just stood there, staring at it. My heartbeat felt too loud, like the walls of the dealership could hear it. I reached inside. My fingers brushed paper. I pulled out a thick manila folder, a sealed envelope with my name on it in Dennis's handwriting, and a small wooden box. I recognized his writing instantly, steady, neat, deliberate. It was the handwriting of a man who measured twice before cutting wood. The handwriting of my husband. I opened the envelope first. His words filled the page, dated 2 months before he died. Carol, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't tell you while I was alive. You would have wanted to handle it together, I know you. But I needed to protect you until I had proof. I've been investigating Vanessa for 18 months. She isn't who she says she is. In this folder, you'll find everything I've gathered. Photos, documents, contact information for her previous victims. She's going to target our house, Carol. That's her pattern. She'll convince Brian you're declining, that the house should be sold. Then she'll disappear with the money. The key in this box is for our safe deposit box. I made sure you'd be okay. Tom knows to call you. Trust him. Protect yourself. Protect our son. He's a victim too. I love you, Dennis. The room blurred around me as the tears came. Not soft tears. These were the kind that gutted you from the inside. Dennis had known. He'd known about Vanessa all along. He'd been fighting this battle quietly, trying to keep us safe. Even in death, he was still protecting me. Tom gave me space. He didn't speak, just stood a few feet away like a sentry, letting me read. When I opened the folder, a storm of truth poured out. Photos of Vanessa with different men, smiling like she'd smiled at Brian. Marriage certificates, one in Phoenix, another in Tampa. Clippings from newspapers, fraud, missing funds, elderly parents left destitute. And Dennis's handwriting on every page. Precise notes, dates, observations. He'd built a case, piece by piece, like he was rebuilding an engine. My hands trembled as I turned each page. Vanessa, no. Whoever she really was, had a pattern. She found men like Brian, men with aging parents, men with assets. She slipped into their lives like honey, warm and sweet, and then she devoured everything. Tom's voice was quiet. Dennis came to me when he started digging, said he didn't want to tell you until he had more than suspicions. He thought Brian wouldn't believe him. I closed my eyes. I could hear Dennis saying it. He loves her too much. He won't listen to me unless I have proof. He'd been right. When I opened my eyes, Tom was watching me carefully. There's more, he said. What? Your son sold this car for $15,000. But, Mrs. Bennett, it's worth a lot more than that. Around $180,000. I let out a shaky breath. My God, I bought it to keep it safe. I had no intention of reselling it. This car was never really mine to keep. It belongs here with you. My throat tightened. Tom, I don't even know what to say. Say you'll fight, he said softly. Because Dennis left you everything you need to win. I ran my thumb over the corner of the folder. Inside it was the evidence that could shatter my son's marriage and maybe his heart. But it was also the truth, and I couldn't ignore it. Not when Dennis had spent the last months of his life gathering it. Tom cleared his throat. There are people in this file. Stanley Wright, George Murphy. They were her previous targets. Dennis tried to reach them before he died. He never got the chance. But you can. I nodded slowly. I didn't have a choice. Tom walked me back toward the front of the dealership. The morning sun hit my face through the wide glass doors, but I didn't feel its warmth. My hands were tight around the folder, the envelope, and that small wooden box. Whatever happens, Tom said, stopping beside my car, remember, Dennis trusted me to help you. You're not alone in this. I looked at him, really looked. A man who owed my husband everything. A man who kept his promise. Thank you, I whispered. Anytime, he replied. I drove home in silence. The world outside passed in blurs of green and gray. When I parked in front of the house, the garage door was still open, that empty space still gaping like a wound. But this time, I wasn't just staring at loss. I was holding a map of the truth. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder spread out in front of me. Dennis's handwriting stared back at me, so alive it hurt. I traced his words with my fingertip. Protect our son. He's a victim, too. Brian. My boy. My stubborn, kind-hearted, blind boy. I opened the manila folder again, this time slower. There were photographs of Vanessa at a wedding with an older man. Another wedding with another man. Copies of marriage certificates with the name Vanessa Cortland, but different grooms. Newspaper clippings about families who'd lost everything. And at the back of the folder, 2 names and numbers written in Dennis's neat script. Stanley Wright. George Murphy. I picked up the phone and held it for a long moment. My hands were shaking. I wasn't ready to make these calls, but I knew I had to. I dialed the first number. It rang 3 times before a tired male voice answered. "Hello? Mr. Wright?" I asked softly. "Yes. My name is Carol Bennett. My son is married to a woman named Vanessa Cortland." Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then a sigh. I was wondering when someone would call. The air in my kitchen seemed to thin out. "Can you tell me what happened?" He told me. About how Vanessa had met him years ago, how she'd charmed him, how she'd slowly convinced him that his mother was declining mentally and needed care, how she'd suggested selling the house, how she'd cleaned out the account and disappeared 2 weeks after the move. By the time he finished, my knuckles were white around the phone. "She'll start with little things," Stanley said. "Comments about your memory, your safety, your house. Then she'll build her case. Don't let her." "Thank you," I whispered. "Stop her," he said. "Please. Don't let her do to you what she did to us." I hung up and sat for a long moment, the phone still in my hand. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something sharper, clearer. When I dialed George Murphy next, I already knew what I was going to hear, and he told me the same story. Different city, different family, same con. She'd sold off his father's business and vanished to Costa Rica with nearly $200,000. 2 men, 2 lives destroyed. And now she was coming for mine. When I hung up the second time, the house felt too quiet, the air too still. Dennis had known all of this. He had tried to shield us. I pressed my hand to the folder, to his words, and whispered, "I'll finish what you started." Outside, the spring wind rustled through the trees. The sound reminded me of the Shelby's engine, that low, steady rumble that had always made me feel safe. Now, it felt like a promise. This time, I wasn't going to let her win. The house felt different that night, colder somehow, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting for what I would do next. I sat at the kitchen table with the manila folder open in front of me, Dennis's handwriting illuminated by the warm glow of the little lamp we bought together 30 years ago. I had read and reread every page of that file, every note, every carefully underlined line. My husband had known. He had fought for us quietly, carrying the weight of this secret in his final months, and now it was my turn to fight. The wooden box sat beside the folder, small and unassuming. Inside was a single key. Dennis had mentioned it in the letter, a safe deposit box at the bank. My fingers brushed against it, and for the first time in months, I felt something solid under the grief. Determination. The next morning, I dressed like a woman with a purpose. Jeans, comfortable shoes, my wedding ring still on my finger, though Dennis had been gone for 8 months. I tucked the folder into a canvas bag and slipped the key into my purse. The drive to the bank was quiet, but inside my head, everything was loud. Dennis's voice, Vanessa's smooth, confident smile, Brian's downcast eyes when he'd told me he sold the car. The bank lobby was busy with people doing ordinary things: deposits, withdrawals, questions about loans. But I wasn't here for something ordinary. The manager, a woman around my age, led me into the vault when I showed her the key and my ID. Box number 447. My hands shook as I turned the key. Inside was a single thick envelope. I opened it carefully, my breath catching at the sight of stock certificates and a neatly folded letter in Dennis's handwriting. "Carol, I bought this stock as a favor to a patient in '94. I never expected anything to come of it. I forgot about it until last month. This is worth more than we ever saved. For you, for our future, for security. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. You're taken care of. Dennis." I blinked back tears. Even in death, he'd made sure I wouldn't be left vulnerable. I took the certificates to the bank manager, my voice a little shaky as I asked what they were worth. She typed something into her computer, and I watched her eyes widen. "Mrs. Bennett," she said softly, "these are currently valued at approximately $342,000. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. That kind of number didn't fit into my world. But Dennis had always been quietly steady. He never bragged, never spent frivolously. Of course, he'd tucked something like this away. I left the bank with the envelope tucked safely in my purse, feeling like I was carrying more than just paper. I was carrying the strength of a man who had loved me enough to prepare for everything. But I also knew this money was exactly what Vanessa was circling like a vulture. That afternoon, I met Tom and a private investigator named Peter Coleman at a small coffee shop near the hospital where I'd worked for 40 years. Tom had made the call. Peter was in his 50s, tall, with kind eyes and the careful, quiet energy of someone who noticed everything. "Dennis was my friend," Peter said, sliding a folder across the table. "We worked together on some of this before he passed." "You knew?" I asked softly. "He made me promise not to come to you unless she made a move. He didn't want to burden you with suspicions." Peter opened his folder, showing me a carefully organized map of Vanessa's digital footprint. For the last 3 months, she's been active on caregiver forums under fake names, asking how to convince resistant elderly people they need help. She's been looking at assisted living facilities, browsing properties for sale, and she's already maxed out multiple credit cards in Brian's name. My hands clenched into fists. "She's following the same pattern she used with her previous victims," Peter continued. "She'll take this Paris trip, make Brian feel like they're living a dream. Then she'll start planting seeds about you, your safety, your memory, your house. Within 6 to 8 months, she'll convince him to sell this place. Then she'll vanish with everything." "She's not taking my house," I said quietly. Peter gave a single nod. "Then we build a case. We document everything. We let her make the first illegal move, and then we strike. She's wanted in 2 other states already. But you need Brian to see the truth himself. If you confront her too soon, she'll twist it and make it look like you're paranoid." Tom leaned forward. "Dennis believed in you. He wanted you to finish what he started." That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, alone with the file. This time, I opened a blank notebook and began to write everything I could remember. Every little moment with Vanessa that didn't sit right. 2 months ago, Brian asked casually where I kept the house deed. 6 weeks ago, Vanessa took photos of every room. 1 month ago, Brian asked if I'd forgotten lunch plans that never existed. 3 weeks ago, Vanessa commented that I seemed so tired lately. 2 weeks ago, I found a senior living brochure in her purse when she left it on the counter. Piece by piece, the pattern formed. It had always been there, but I hadn't wanted to see it. When they returned from Paris, I was ready. They pulled into the driveway on a Tuesday afternoon. The BMW door opened, and Vanessa stepped out in designer clothes I'd never seen before. Brian looked sunburned, tired, and distracted. I forced a warm smile as they walked up to the house. I had made pot roast, Dennis's favorite. And Brian's, too. It wasn't just dinner. It was a weapon made of memories. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd raised my son, where Dennis used to sit, sipping coffee on quiet mornings. Vanessa talked about Paris nonstop. The hotels, the meals, the views. She spoke like someone rehearsing a performance, every detail meant to shine. "It was wonderful," she said, glancing at Brian with a soft smile. "But it made me realize how much we're missing out on here. Brian works so hard, and we have so little to show for it." She looked directly at me when she said it. I kept my face calm, neutral. Then she leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet. "Carol, don't you think this house is too big for one person? Have you ever thought about downsizing? Maybe something a little more manageable?" And there it was, the first real move. I'm managing just fine, I said evenly. Vanessa's smile didn't falter. Of course, we just worry about you. The stairs, the yard. It's a lot for someone your age. Brian nodded weakly. We worry about you being here alone, Mom. My heart clenched. He said we. After dinner, Vanessa excused herself to use the bathroom. 10 minutes passed. I found her upstairs, standing near Dennis's old office. The bathroom door was downstairs. Always had been. Oh, she said with a soft laugh when she saw me. I must have gotten turned around. This house has so many rooms. Her laugh was too light, too careful. I didn't say a word, just let her back down the stairs. The next morning, I called Brian. I need to talk to you, I said. Just you. About something your father left behind. Silence. Then, Vanessa and I don't keep secrets, Mom. This is between you and me, Brian, I said gently. Please. A long pause. Then he sighed. Okay. I'll be there this afternoon. When he arrived, I already had the investigation file on the kitchen table. He sat down across from me, arms crossed, defensive before I'd even opened my mouth. If this is about the car again, it's not, I interrupted. This is about your father and about Vanessa. I handed him Dennis's letter, watched his face pale as he read the words. Dad was investigating her, he said finally. His voice cracked between disbelief and anger. Yes, I said softly. For 18 months, Brian stood abruptly, pushing the chair back. This is insane. He never liked her. He was paranoid. This is ridiculous. Then prove me wrong, I said, sliding the paper with the names and numbers of Stanley Wright and George Murphy across the table. Call them. He stared at the paper like it was a live wire. They're not strangers, Brian, I said. They were married to her before you. She ruined their lives. Brian's hands clenched. He stood there, shaking his head, then stormed toward the door. Brian, please, I said softly. He turned, his eyes wet. Why can't you just let me be happy? My voice broke. Because your father died, trying to protect you. He didn't answer. Just slammed the door behind him. I stood there alone, with the folder still on the table, and Dennis's words echoing in my head. Protect our son. He's a victim too. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees like an engine coming to life. I held on to the edge of the table. I didn't know what Brian would do, whether he'd call those numbers or run straight to Vanessa. But Dennis had trusted me to see this through, and I would. The house was quiet that night. Too quiet. Not the warm silence of an evening shared with someone you love, but the hollow kind that settles when something is about to crack wide open. I sat in the living room with the lamp on low, staring at Dennis's investigation folder on the coffee table. The edges of the papers were soft now from being turned over so many times. His handwriting looked alive under the light, steady and careful, like he was still sitting across from me. Brian hadn't called. Hours had passed since he stormed out. Every sound outside made my heart jerk. A car passing, a dog barking down the street, the ticking of the old clock on the wall steady, relentless. I'd spent my entire life protecting other people. First my patients, then Brian. And for the first time, I had to accept something bitter and hard to swallow. I couldn't protect him from the truth. He had to see it himself. The phone rang at midnight. Brian's name lit up the screen. My breath caught. Brian? I answered. His voice was raw, cracking around the edges. Mom. I called them. I called both of them. My grip on the phone tightened. What did they say? Everything, he whispered. I could hear him trying to steady his breathing. It's the same story. Both of them. The houses. The money. How she made them think their parents were slipping. How she disappeared afterward. It's the exact same thing, Mom. I closed my eyes. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. He exhaled shakily. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself this was some mistake. But when I got home tonight, I just I started asking her questions. What kind of questions? Basic ones, he said. About where she grew up, her family, her past. Just small things. But the answers were different. Completely different from everything she's told me before. It was like a switch flipped. Her face changed. Like she dropped the mask. A cold shiver ran through me. She told me the credit cards in my name were business investments. His voice broke on the last word. I asked what business. She wouldn't tell me. Said I wouldn't understand. When I pushed her, she packed a bag. She's gone, Mom. She just walked out. I stood slowly. The phone pressed to my ear. Where is she now? I don't know. She turned off her phone. She said I was weak. That I'm just like everyone else. She said I ruined everything. Brian, I whispered. Listen to me. You didn't ruin anything. She did. There was silence. Then a sharp breath. I should have listened to Dad. I should have listened to you. Don't do that to yourself, I said softly. We're not going to lose to her. Not now. After we hung up, I immediately called Peter Coleman. He answered on the first ring. She's moving, he said before I could even speak. His voice was brisk. All business. Your son just called me too. We've been tracking her credit cards. She's at the airport Marriott. She's made multiple cash withdrawals in the last few hours. About 12,000 total. She just booked a one-way flight to Mexico City. My blood went cold. She's running. Yes. But the good news is we have a case. Her identity is fake. We've confirmed she's wanted in 2 other states. If Brian gives a formal statement about the forged credit cards, we can have her arrested before she boards that flight. I didn't hesitate. Tell us where to meet you. It was 3 in the morning when Brian showed up at my door. His eyes were red, his face pale. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. In his hands, he carried nothing. No bag, no coat. Just himself, exhausted and broken. Peter pulled up a few minutes later, sharp in a dark jacket, a folder tucked under his arm. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Brian used to do his homework, where Dennis and I had celebrated birthdays, where life had felt so safe once upon a time. Peter laid everything out. Vanessa is leaving on a 6 a.m. flight. Police are coordinating with airport security. There are active warrants under her real name, Linda Marsh. But we need Brian's statement about the fraud to bring her in. Are you ready to do that? Brian swallowed hard. Yeah, he said finally. His voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. This will get public, Peter warned. There will be hearings, testimony. She's good at twisting stories. But the truth is on your side. Brian nodded, jaw tight. Let's finish what Dad started. We drove through the still sleeping city in Peter's car. The streets were empty, the world wrapped in darkness except for the occasional glow of streetlights. Brian sat in the back seat, staring out the window like he was trying to piece his life back together, one broken shard at a time. I reached back and took his hand. He squeezed it tightly. The airport buzzed with quiet early morning activity when we arrived. Business travelers with rolling suitcases. The smell of burnt coffee. That strange, almost artificial light that makes everything feel surreal. We waited near the security checkpoint with 2 plainclothes detectives. Peter stood a little ahead, speaking softly into a radio. Brian's hand didn't let go of mine. At 5:30, she appeared. Vanessa. She walked through the terminal with 2 large suitcases, a designer coat, and sunglasses perched on her perfect face despite the hour. She looked like someone on her way to a luxury vacation, not a woman whose web of lies was about to unravel. She moved with that same calm confidence that used to charm everyone, including my son, but this time I saw the cracks beneath the polish. The detective stepped forward just as she approached the security line. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," one of them said. She turned slowly. Her smile froze for the briefest moment, then returned like it had been painted on. "Is there a problem, officers?" The detective held up his badge. "We have a warrant for your arrest, Linda Marsh." Vanessa's smile faltered. "I don't know who that is. My name is Vanessa Bennett." "Ma'am," the second detective said firmly, "please step aside." She glanced over her shoulder, saw the exits blocked, saw them, saw us, and then she ran. She dropped her suitcases, kicked off her heels, and bolted across the terminal in her stockings. But security was ready. 2 officers tackled her near the departure board, taking her down hard. She screamed, kicked, thrashed, but it was useless. Travelers stopped to watch. Some raised their phones. They cuffed her on the floor as she kept shouting, "Get off me! I haven't done anything!" A detective opened her luggage. Inside the first suitcase were clothes and toiletries. Inside the second were stacks of cash bound with rubber bands, a fake passport under the name Linda Brennan, and a portable hard drive. Then Vanessa looked up, saw Brian standing about 30 feet away, saw me beside him. Her face twisted into something I had never seen before. Pure rage. "You," she hissed. She lunged, the officers holding her back. "You did this." Brian flinched, but didn't move. She laughed then, wild and sharp. "You're pathetic, weak, stupid, just like the others. You think someone like me ever loved you?" I stepped forward, not much, just enough to stand between them. Her fury turned to me. "You interfering old woman. This was mine. My score. 3 years I spent on this. You should have just died already." The words echoed through the terminal, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I just stood there, steady as stone. Dennis had taught me that kind of quiet strength. She couldn't touch me anymore. The officers dragged her away, still screaming, her voice fading as she disappeared through the security doors. For a long moment, no one said anything. The airport noise returned like a wave. People moved on. Flights departed. Life went on. Brian finally whispered, "She never loved me." I turned to him. His face was pale, but his eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in years. "No," I said softly. "She didn't. But that was never your fault." His shoulders slumped as he exhaled, and I realized that in that moment, the boy I'd raised was still in there. Hurt, betrayed, but still mine. Peter approached us. "They'll hold her. The prosecutor's already been notified. She's not going anywhere." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Thank you." He gave me a tired smile. "Your husband built the foundation. You finished the job." As we walked out of the terminal into the pale pink of early morning, the sun was just starting to rise. I could feel it on my face, a quiet kind of warmth. For the first time in a long time, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt like something had been lifted. Brian drove home with me, silent for most of the ride. When we pulled into the driveway, the garage door was still closed, but I could see the faint oil stain on the concrete through the window. The space that had once felt like a wound no longer felt empty. It felt like a beginning. The days after Vanessa's arrest passed in a strange kind of quiet. It wasn't the heavy silence that had settled over the house after Dennis died. No, this was different. This was the kind of silence that comes after a storm finally tears itself out and the world stands still, holding its breath. Brian moved back into the house temporarily, saying it was just until things calmed down. But I could feel something shifting in him already. The hard edges of shame and guilt were still there, but they were softening, melting into something more fragile, understanding, maybe, or healing. The Shelby sat in the garage again. Tom had brought it home 2 days after the airport. When I stepped into that space and saw the burgundy paint under the morning light, my knees almost gave out. The smell of old leather and gasoline wrapped around me like a hug I didn't know I'd needed. Brian had been the one to open the garage door for me that morning. He didn't say much, just watched me with wet eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice barely there. I turned to him. For a moment, he wasn't a grown man. He was that little boy who used to run to Dennis with a skinned knee, searching for comfort. "You're my son," I said softly. "You don't have to earn forgiveness. You already have it." His face crumpled, and he wrapped his arms around me. It was the first time he'd hugged me like that since Dennis's funeral. That hug didn't erase everything, but it started to stitch the torn fabric back together. Over the next week, I met with the police, prosecutors, and Peter to give my statement. The fraud charges against Vanessa Lindo were strong. There were multiple warrants, and other victims had already started to come forward after her arrest made the local news. Peter said she wouldn't be walking free for a long, long time. Brian spent most of his days helping me around the house, quietly trying to rebuild trust without saying it out loud. I let him. Healing isn't made of grand gestures. It's built slowly, in small, ordinary moments. One morning, I found him sitting in Dennis's old office, staring at the photos on the wall. There was one of Dennis and Brian when Brian was 10, both of them covered in grease, grinning beside the Shelby after their first father-son oil change. I watched Brian run his thumb over the frame like he was trying to hold on to something that had always been there but he'd forgotten. "Dad would have been so disappointed in me," he said quietly, not looking at me. I stepped into the room, my hands tucked into my sweater sleeves. "No," I said softly. "He would have been heartbroken at what she did. But disappointed in you? Never." He looked at me then, eyes red. "I sold his car, Mom. For her, I didn't even think twice. How could I have been so blind?" "Because you loved her," I said gently. "Because she was good at lying. Because you're human." He let out a long breath, shoulders sagging. "I feel like such a fool." I walked over and touched his cheek the way I used to when he was a boy. "Fools don't face the truth, Brian. But you did. That's what your father would have been proud of." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The house creaked softly in the wind. Outside, spring was blooming, but inside, something else was quietly taking root. A few days later, Tom stopped by with coffee and one of those donuts he knew I liked. He leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the sunlight slide across the floor. "You know," he said, "Dennis used to talk about how he wanted to take you on one last road trip in that car. Said he'd drive and you'd just sit there, letting the wind do all the talking." My throat tightened. "He told you that?" Tom nodded, his eyes soft. "He even mapped it out. Route 66. He said it wasn't about the road, it was about the time, the quiet. He wanted to give you one last adventure." I looked toward the garage, where the Shelby sat like a silent witness to everything. The idea of that road trip wrapped around my heart like something warm. Dennis might not be here anymore, but his dreams still were. That night, after Brian had gone to bed, I walked into the garage alone. The cool air hit my skin, and I ran my fingers along the Shelby's hood. It still had that faint smell of him. "Dennis," I whispered, "we're okay. He's okay." I climbed into the driver's seat for the first time since he'd passed. The leather creaked under me. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, a low, steady growl that felt like a heartbeat. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined Dennis in the passenger seat, laughing that big, warm laugh that used to fill this space. The next morning, I told Brian, "I'm going to take the trip," I said over breakfast. He looked up, startled. "What trip?" "Route 66, I said simply. "Your dad's trip. The one he planned for us." His mouth opened, then closed. "Mom, that's a lot of driving." "I know," I said with a small smile. "That's the point." He stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Do you want me to come with you?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "I think this is something I need to do alone. But I want to come back to you." He squeezed my hand. "Then I'll be right here when you do." The days leading up to the trip were a flurry of small preparations. I packed a few clothes, Dennis's favorite flannel, and the letter he wrote me, the one that started this entire unraveling of lies. I slipped it into the glove compartment, right where his hand used to rest. Tom helped me tune up the Shelby, making sure it was as ready as I was. He didn't say much, just tightened bolts and wiped his hands on a rag. But when he handed me the keys, his eyes were damp. "You've got this," he said. I smiled. "I know." The morning I left, the sun rose soft and gold, spilling over the neighborhood like a blessing. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against my legs. The house stood behind me, quiet but no longer heavy. Brian stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, watching me. He wasn't the broken man from the airport anymore. He was my son again. "Drive safe, Mom," he called out. I smiled through the lump in my throat. "Always." I pressed my foot on the gas, and the Shelby responded with that familiar purr. The road opened in front of me like a ribbon, wide and endless. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was driving away from something. I was driving toward something, somewhere along that stretch of highway. With the wind rushing through the open window, I started to talk to Dennis out loud. I told him about the airport, about Brian, about how the car came home, about how I wasn't scared anymore. And if the wind carried my words away, that was fine. I knew he heard me anyway. At a little gas station just outside Amarillo, I stopped for coffee and leaned against the car, staring at the sky painted pink and gold. A couple walked by and pointed at the Shelby. "Beautiful," the man said. I smiled. "She's got history," he nodded, grinning. "You can tell." I watched them drive away, and something loosened in my chest. Grief wasn't gone. It never would be. But it wasn't choking me anymore. It had settled somewhere softer, like a second skin I'd learned to live with. I drove for hours that day, past towns and fields and faded billboards. With every mile, the weight on my chest grew lighter. That night, I pulled into a small roadside motel, the kind Dennis used to love because the coffee is always terrible, but the people always have stories. I lay in bed with the sound of the highway humming outside and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the kind that pretends everything's perfect. The real kind. The kind that blooms quietly after you've walked through fire and realized you're still standing. The second morning of my trip began with the kind of stillness that only comes from being far from everything familiar. The motel curtains let in a pale golden light that stretched across the bed like soft fingers, gently waking me up. Outside, the sound of distant traffic hummed like a heartbeat, steady and calm. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hands over Dennis's old flannel shirt draped across my lap. It still smelled faintly of him. That quiet strength, that warmth. I checked out of the motel with a thermos of bitter coffee in hand and climbed into the Shelby. When the engine roared to life, it wasn't just a car starting, it was a voice I knew. It was Dennis, the man who'd held me through every storm, who'd planned this trip as his final love letter. I hit the road as the sun climbed higher. Route 66 stretched before me like an old song, familiar even though I'd never driven it alone before. Towns flickered by each one, a tiny world with its own rhythm, a diner with chipped blue paint, a vintage gas station where the attendant's smile reminded me of the kindness of strangers Dennis always believed in. I'd never really been alone like this, not since I was a girl. After Dennis died, being alone had felt like a punishment. But out here, with the wind in my hair and the steady growl of the engine beneath me, it felt different. It felt like breathing again. Around noon, I pulled off at a roadside diner. A bell jingled softly as I stepped inside. The place smelled like bacon and old coffee. and the walls were covered with black and white photos of travelers from decades ago. A woman behind the counter looked up with a warm smile. "Morning, sweetheart. Just you and that beautiful car outside?" she asked. I smiled back. "Just me and her." She poured me coffee and set down a plate of pie before I could even order. "Looks like you've been on the road a while. Pie's on the house." I sat at the counter, sipping my coffee, and realized how much I'd changed without even noticing. A few weeks ago, I wouldn't have set foot in a place like this alone. I would have been too wrapped up in my grief, too weighed down by what had been taken from me. But now, sitting here, I felt something simple and steady. I felt strong. The woman behind the counter struck up a conversation. She told me about her kids, about how her husband had rebuilt the diner after a tornado 20 years ago. "We've been through worse," she said, laughing. "You'd be surprised what survives if you just hold on tight enough." Her words stayed with me long after I got back on the road. That afternoon, I stopped at a quiet overlook where the highway curved around a stretch of wide, empty desert. The view stretched for miles, gold and red earth against a sky so blue it almost didn't look real. I stood there beside the Shelby, the wind tugging at my hair, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself just feel everything. The grief, the anger, the love, the strength. Dennis wasn't here, but the life we built together still was. It was in the smell of the car's leather seats, in Brian's clumsy way of fixing the fence last spring, in the way Tom still stopped by with coffee and donuts just to check in. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I made it this far, Dennis." And in that still desert air, it felt like he heard me. That night, I stayed at a small inn run by a couple in their 70s. The husband had a laugh that filled the room, and his wife made lemonade so sweet it could cure any ache. They asked about my car, about where I was headed. When I told them it was a trip Dennis had planned before he passed, the woman put her hand over mine. "Then he's still with you, honey," she said softly. "Men like that never really leave." I smiled through the sting of tears. "I think you're right." Later, lying in the small, clean room with the window cracked open to let in the night breeze, I thought about Brian. The pain on his face, the night Vanessa was arrested, still haunted me. But so did the look in his eyes when he hugged me in the garage. He wasn't lost anymore, not completely. He was trying to climb his way out of the hole she'd pulled him into. I knew it wouldn't happen overnight. Healing never does. But I also knew my boy was still in there, under all that shame and hurt. The next morning, I called him from the road. "Hey, Mom," he answered. His voice was still a little rough around the edges, but it didn't sound hollow anymore. "Hey, sweetheart," I said. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," he said after a pause. "I've been talking to Tom a lot. He says Dad would have kicked my butt but then hugged me right after." I laughed softly. "That sounds like him." "Mom?" His voice shifted. "When you come home, can we fix the fence together? And maybe, I don't know, work on the Shelby? I don't want to run from what I did. I want to make it right." Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't from pain. "Yes," I said softly. "We'll fix it. Together." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. But there was something in the silence now. Something clean, something whole. I drove for hours that day, stopped at quirky roadside attractions, walked into a gift shop that sold snow globes shaped like vintage cars, ate a grilled cheese sandwich at a place with only 3 tables, talked to strangers who didn't know my story but smiled at me anyway. Somewhere between Arizona and New Mexico, I started to laugh out loud. It wasn't forced. It wasn't broken. It was real. And when I laughed, I could almost hear Dennis laughing with me. On the 5th night of my trip, I sat on the hood of the Shelby, under a sky dusted with stars so bright they felt close enough to touch. I thought about how much had changed since the day I stood in the garage and found that car gone. That day, I'd felt powerless, small, stripped of the life I'd built. But here, beneath this sky, I felt like I'd found myself again. I pulled Dennis's letter from the glove compartment and read it once more. His handwriting was steady, like the man he'd been. Protect our son. Trust your strength. This car was never about the engine. It was about us, about what we built together. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my heart. Dennis, I whispered, you were right. I was stronger than I thought. When I returned home a week later, the house didn't feel like a place of loss anymore. It felt like a home again. Brian was on the porch, waiting for me, hands shoved into his pockets. When I parked the Shelby, he came down the steps with a grin that looked a little like the one his father used to wear. "Welcome home, Mom," he said. I stepped out of the car, and before I could say anything, he pulled me into a hug. Not a tentative one, a real one. Solid, warm, alive. We stood there for a long time, letting everything that had been broken settle quietly into something new. Inside, the house smelled like fresh coffee. Brian had cleaned, fixed the broken hinge on the cabinet, even started working on Dennis's office, clearing out the clutter but leaving the photos right where they belonged. Later that night, as we sat at the kitchen table, I noticed something that made my chest ache in a good way. Brian was home. Not just physically. His eyes were clear. His laugh was back. The shadow Vanessa had cast over him was gone. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying everything alone. The Shelby sat in the garage like a silent witness to all of it. But it wasn't just a car anymore. It was a promise. A reminder of love that outlived betrayal. It was our story. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that life doesn't fall apart all at once. It unravels slowly. A quiet lie here. A piece of trust chipped away there. One day, you look up and realize the life you built with both hands is hanging by a single thread. But what they don't tell you is this healing can happen the same way. Quietly. In the smallest of moments. A shared cup of coffee. A door left open. A car engine rumbling back to life. For months, I thought losing Dennis meant losing everything. I thought the pain would be my final chapter. But pain, as it turns out, isn't the end. It's the forge. It remakes you, reshapes you, hardens what needs to be strong, and softens what needs to stay tender. Vanessa stole a piece of my past, but she didn't take my future. I stood my ground. I faced the storm. And when it passed, what remained was not the woman I used to be, but the woman Dennis always believed I could become. Strong, steady, unafraid to fight for the people she loves. Brian and I still have cracks between us. Healing takes time. But now, when I look at him, I don't see the brokenness anymore. I see the boy who learned, the man who came back, the son Dennis and I raised with love. And when I look at the Shelby in the garage, I don't just see a car, I see a legacy. I see the story of a marriage built on trust, a love that even betrayal couldn't erase, and a promise that keeps on breathing. So, if you've ever felt like someone stole a part of your life, hear me when I say this. You can rebuild. You can reclaim what was taken. Not because you have to go back to who you were, but because you can become someone stronger. I did. And if my story touched your heart even just a little, stay. Listen. Because life is full of storms. Yes, but it's also full of people like us, who learn to stand tall after they pass. Subscribe and join me next time. There are more stories like this to tell, more hearts to heal.